happy to have you here again watching the book club. Tonight, we have a special guest who has written a different sort of book to what we usually um, review on the book club, but we are so excited to talk about this book because it's something that we all will find interesting and we can all find a piece of ourselves in. As you know, is our custom, I always like to start each book club with a quote from a famous African. And today, I am starting with a quote from Chinua Achebe, and the quote goes like this: I believe in the complexity of the human story, and there's no way you can tell that story in one way and say, this is it. Always there will be someone who can tell it differently, depending on where they are standing. This is the way I think the world's stories should be told, from many different perspectives. And I've chosen this quote. As you know, I always single out my quotes when I think they encapsulate the body of work of the writer we will be talking to, or a particular book we will be talking about. And you'll find out why I chose this particular quote. So today in the studio, we have Phumzile Simelane Kalumba. She was born in Mpumalanga, graduated from the University of Cape Town in 1998 with a BCom degree, lived in the northeast of England with her family for 7 years. While there, she developed an interest in South African Bantu names. At the time of her first edition, which is around 2014, I think, she was currently pursuing her master's degree in the Department of Xhosa at the University of the Western Cape with special interest in onomastics, which is part of African folklore. And she has written now, I think, 2 editions of a book entitled Jabulani Means Rejoice, a dictionary of South African names. Welcome, Phumzile. How are you today?
Thank you very much, Selena, and your audience. I'm very well and excited to be on Tanda today. Thank you.
Thank you. And you just look lovely. You absolutely
Thank
look
you.
gorgeous. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. Thank you.
All right. So, a little bit about the book Jabulani. Jabulani Means Rejoice is a dictionary comprised of hundreds of African names in local South African languages, meticulously assembled and expounded upon for the curious reader. Names are listed in alphabetical order with gender indications, as well as information regarding their ethnographic origins and meanings. Yet Jabulani Means Rejoice is so much more than simply a list of names and their meanings. The author skillfully interweaves cultural context and history, including issues surrounding naming rituals, domestic disputes, and the curse of the evil eye. As a reference work, the book stands as an invaluable contribution to the growing interest in African cultural history. With its names ranging from the traditional to the unconventional, it will appeal to linguists, family historians, and anyone with an interest in names. Anyone with an interest in names. So I found this appealing because it was the first ever South African dictionary of South African Bantu names. I've also found it appealing because it's become a living body of work with several editions. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, what prompted me to write Jabulani Means Rejoice was the birth of my children. Not just that, but the fact that I was away from home, and also the fact that my husband is not from the same language that I speak, even not from the same country. So, of course, with that mix and the blend, you can imagine now when you're naming the children and you want to use an African language, you have to think about the name. I'm sure everyone thinks about the name, but with those dynamics, you have to give it an extra thought. And he was interested in South African names and their meanings. So he asked me to compile a few names which were of interest to me and their meanings. So basically, that was the birth of Jabulani, the birth of my firstborn, who's turning 21 this year. and that's how the list started.
Mm. Well, I think that the story of how the book came to be, it's such a powerful title. Jabulani Means Rejoice. For him, must be quite um, rewarding because, in essence, that's what he answers to when his name is being called as this journey that you started, that so many of us have come on as we've experienced your book or what we've come to know about the book. So that's pretty cool. So you've now written a couple of editions, and you've been known to describe this work as a living work.
Yes.
After you wrote the first edition, it became very clear that you had only scratched the surface on a much deeper sort of repository of knowledge. And I find that very interesting because often when we speak of naming rituals in Africa, we try to always lump them all together and homogenize them across all of the different nations that make up the African continent. But what I
Mm.
found interesting is that there are unique nuances, unique peculiarities to the naming rituals for South African Bantu names, and you've only just scratched the surface. Would you
Mm.
call this journey a progressive learning, a calling, something that has chosen you and taken over? Had you ever expected it to grow into what it became?
No, not at all. I never. Um, but in my family, there has always been an interest way of naming and the meaning of the names, but it never really hit or sink to say, you know what, there's something in there until I was out of the familiar. My leaving South Africa, left South Africa in 2000, yeah, 2000. When I got married to my husband, I went and I lived in Uganda, which was a place that was totally different from what I'm
Mm,
familiar to. The culture was different, the names were different, and people had to try and call my name, which is something that has never happened. So everything kind of like took a different meaning, even the identity.
mhm,
You tend to think more of who you are when you are out of the familiar. So my name, trying to explain who I am through my name, made it something that was like a journey in its own. But I never thought that it will now be something that I can, even when I came back, we came back to South Africa in 2009, which is almost 9 years later. Then it became a different identity. Even when I was with the familiar, then there
mm,
was
mm,
this Jabulani, which I'm bringing from across the nations, but back home to where it
mm,
actually belongs. And it was funny because most of the work I did when we were in the UK, because I was in Uganda for a year, and then we went over for him to pursue his studies there. And when I had put everything together, I took the book to the publisher, and the publisher told me that, you know what, this is fascinating work,
mhm,
and the best place to publish this thing is in South Africa, and which that is where I actually published it. But it was a journey that actually took me to different countries before I finally came back home to actually say, here it is, it actually belongs here.
mm. That's pretty amazing, and that's a writer's dream, really. That people would immediately see and connect with your work,
Mm.
and see value in it. Have you been surprised by any of the responses from audiences, and people who've read the book? I know that immediately the first instinct is to try and find one's name in the book,
Yes,
and then the names of
correct.
people that you know to kind of
Yeah.
see some of
Mm.
the different, meanings or origins of that name. But have there been other surprising reactions or responses to the book that sort of took you aback and thought, "Oh, I never saw it that way"?
Yeah. What surprised me most, which shouldn't really, was the fact that each and every one of us has a story to tell.
Mhm, mhm,
And by doing this book, though it was first and such an aid to the body of knowledge, was kind of preserving some stories while killing other stories.
Mm.
What do I mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
Say, for instance, my name, Phumzile, has a meaning to my family, to the namer who gave me that name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I write this book and I say Phumzile. And under that name, I will put my story,
Mm-hmm.
which is okay. Of course, it's easy if you are doing the meaning at the shallow end, which is the literal meaning, Phumzile,
Mm-hmm.
which means that someone who gives you rest or something like that. But when you go to the context of the namer and you write the context of one namer in the story, for example, when I was named, my mother, after he gave birth to two sons, he couldn't conceive.
Mm-hmm.
And it bothered her. She will walk around and when she goes shopping, she will pick baby girl clothes, and she was fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine a heart of someone who is looking for a baby girl, and let alone someone who's looking for a child. What
Mm-hmm.
happens in that space of their mind and all that. So she then gives me this name to say she has rested from that torment. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that's one story. It goes
Mm-hmm.
to the book. But what does that mean? Somebody else
Mm-hmm.
picks the story, the book, look through the book and look for their name, their Phumzile. Yes, but then it's a different story.
Yeah.
So that surprised me to say, you know what, oral history, as much as it had its own disadvantage in the fact that we are not able to keep this and preserve these stories because of how our society is now,
Mm-hmm.
but it had its advantage, and the advantage was that it was a living
Mm-hmm.
kind of way to contain stories. So
Mm-hmm.
that surprised me to say, you know what, this book is fantastic, but it has killed some stories. We need everybody's stories. Everybody must get to tell their own story,
Mm-hmm.
but the book is not able to do that.
Mm. Yeah, but I mean, it is a beginning, a conversation starter for those
Yeah.
stories to be revived, and for that practice to continue in a different way. I found it interesting that uh, the same name can elicit different stories in different families, and different contexts. And what you highlight about the meaning to the name giver and the
Mm,
context is so powerful. But in the book, you actually also speak about the importance of naming and basically, the colloquial idea of what is in a name. And some
yeah.
of the things that you highlight are we get identity. So it's not necessarily identity around the literal meaning of the name, but we get identity in terms of traditions and culture,
Mm,
which is made by people as much as it's observed by people. So, in that, we know where we've come from, and then we have an opportunity, I suppose, when we take it upon ourselves to then craft the next chapter of the story in terms of where we're going. You've also talked about how the meaning is derived from use. So that's the use of the name giver, the use of a particular moment in time. And you've, in the book, there are different examples of this from pre-colonial names, colonial names, and modern names. There's also the issue of hopes and sentiments, and naming practices around protecting the child, so emotional warnings, but also spiritual protection by covering or packaging the child. Um, and also ideas around futures. And one of the people you actually highlight or talk about is actually Nelson Mandela and the different names he had.
yeah.
And in that, touching on naming practices through different times of history, because we had traditional names, the traditional Bantu names, and then we had school names, then we had missionary names, and so forth and so
Mm.
forth. So, tell us, Phumzile, what really actually is in a name?
Well, what is in a name is the heritage. The heritage that the namer has, and hopes and desires to pass on to the named.
Mhm.
And what is in the name as well is power, because the namer gets the power
Mm,
to actually hope, pray, and for some who believe, actually define somebody's destiny. And what is in the name as well is the voice, because the
mm,
name can give a voice to someone who is voiceless.
mm,
In
mm,
certain African communities, a young wife will not have a say within the affairs of the family. They will not have a say, maybe if, say, they are the wife who comes in when it's a polygamous family and they are already wives, they would not have a say. Some of them will not have a say until they have a child. That is
mhm,
the only time that they are recognized or they are seen,
mm,
but their voice can only be heard through the name that they will give to the child.
mm,
And there's also history that is contained within the name. Some people, we can know exactly what was happening within the family because of the name that the child was given. Sometimes
mm,
you will have a tragedy that happens. You will have a loss of a loved one that happens.
mm,
But when the child is born, then there is a promise of rebirth. And in that promise of rebirth, the name comes out and the family
mm,
then is comforted. And
mm, mhm.
within the name as well, there is there is war. Sometimes uh, in certain families, they will use names to actually say something that will pick on something. And what is fascinating is that someone can wait for the birth of, say, 3 children to finish a sentence.
Wow. Mm, mm,
So there is so much within a name,
mm,
um, that it is just within you understanding the name to then unpack and then say, okay, this is what is in this name.
mm. That's really powerful. And there's so much story in all of that, these names are more than just labels. They are telling us so much if we would sit and take time to listen to them. But also the way that they change through history, and how we name things changes through history, because I feel like people have started to appreciate the power of naming, and so there's a different sort of intent. Whereas, 20 years ago, a second wife in a family might have named her children something, or a widowed woman might have named her son something, to speak out where she could not speak out. 25 years later, there's an interesting sort of trend towards naming what you want your child to answer to in terms of their hopes and futures.
Correct.
But in essence, there's also a universality to that, because if we look at what you call ugly naming practices, those were there to protect, but this is just now a different way of protecting, the people that we name. Can you tell us a little bit more and unpack the naming ritual around ugly names, or not quite so savory names?
Well, um, I think then we need to go to the issue of the name, what is in the name, and maybe I did not mention that within a name is also a belief system.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be because of what is believed within the family. Sometimes you will have a woman who would have been giving birth to the children and the children are dying. And the belief is the children are attractive to evil, like the evil ones, these children. So we need to kind of like cover the children or disguise the child. So
Mm.
then those are ugly name to say it's dirt. It's a communication to the evil eye to say it's dead, it's not a child, don't take it away, don't worry
Mm.
about it, kind of. So that would be the belief system to say that name would have been a kind of like a cover for the child. It's not an ugly name for the sake of just giving the child an ugly name, but to cover and to protect. But you need to be
Mm.
in the belief system yourself to kind of like understand that line of belief and what is happening there. But the challenge with moving from that belief system and to the child now having to answer to that name under a different belief system, and you have to ask that child, what is the meaning
Mm.
of your name? Then that's where I think conflict happens, because if it's a belief system, it's very difficult to actually explain.
Mm.
But those other names, it will be a tradition because of the belief system that maybe the child is attractive and we need to protect the child. So they are called protective names.
Mm. Protective names. Yes, very, very interesting because um, uh, certainly the move in colonization to change the names, which I think speaks to your earlier point about the power in naming.
Yes.
When you name something, you have the power to almost direct a trajectory for that which is being named. And of course, I think whenever we explore issues around colonization, that whole system of naming or labeling is othering,
Mm,
of whatever it is that we're doing. And so the ugly name is othering, whereas internally in the belief system of a tradition, of a Bantu tradition, it's actually a protective ritual, and
yes.
not many people understand that or know that. And it actually speaks to a kind of spiritual sensitivity that, doesn't lend itself to the colonial story. We've got Wanjura Muthoni, who has joined us from Kenya. We're so happy to have you with us. And
Yes.
we've got some interesting comments there. A name gives a sense of belonging to a culture, a place, a group, an age group. Thank you, Wanjira, for that contribution. And ugly
Mhm.
names in my culture, Gikuyu, is a way of speaking to evil spirits. Njogu, I don't know if I have pronounced that correctly, means elephant and tells evil spirits to keep off. Very, very rich contribution there. But also,
Yes.
as I've struggled to pronounce that name, it also brings me back to the topic of the day, which is around naming and names, and how pronunciation also plays a part in
Mm.
naming rituals and provides certain nuances. Now, in your early editions of the book, you don't go as far as to the pronunciation, but how important is that in naming rituals and naming practice?
It is important. I'm fascinated by Njongu, because elephant, we call it Ndlovu, which
Mm-hmm.
is, you can see that Bantu names are actually, because I think it says example Njongu, which is Njovu, means an elephant.
Mm-hmm.
What is your pronunciation of an elephant, Selina?
Nzo.
Is
Nzo, yeah. Yeah.
Njovu.
So it's like
Yeah.
they're all related. Yeah.
Yes. It was
Mm.
just so difficult, I think, to go into the issue of pronunciation, because of the fact that, if you will know, the Nguni and the South African bars and the cues and the,
Mm,
so we wanted to do that, but then we thought it's another it's gonna be another layer which I wasn't prepared to go to.
mm,
But it's important, and it's important to connect with a person through the name.
mhm,
And I think because we felt like I'm doing it wrong, I'm doing it right, we are not able to actually embrace the name and ask
mhm,
the person, how do I pronounce your name?
mm,
Because the colonial way of dealing with that was to change somebody's name.
mhm,
But if you think about it, for most of African names, there are shortened versions. There are easier versions, which are still acceptable. So when
mhm,
you find yourself that, I mean, there is this sentence that you cannot even start to pronounce, the person,
mhm,
you engage with the person and say, oh, how do I pronounce your name? Then I will tell you, no, you can call me Pumi.
mhm,
And it's fine, we've connected. But I think there is that thing of looking at the name and like, can I call you John? Instead of dealing with the name. So some of the names then ended up being changed or completely being lost, and our stories being lost with it just because they couldn't be pronounced.
mm. Yeah, that's so true, the loss. Because until you unpack what's in a name, you have no idea what you're losing when you cast it aside or change it to make it so-called easier to pronounce or for
Yeah.
whatever reason in a particular
Mm,
context. So it's very, very powerful, the issue of connection. Now, just to take it a bit closer to home for you, you've already
mm,
told us the meaning of your name. So there was a story, something happening in your family at the time. And so the
yes.
name giver, your mother, gave you a name, okay, which is Phumzile, which is around we have rested or we are resting or at rest. And then
Yes.
you have so you answer to that name. You have received that story.
Mm.
How have you changed or told a different story through your own life experience? What are the different ways in which you are bringing rest to yourself or experiencing rest through your story?
Well, I've realized that my name has actually defined who I am. To the namer who I lost, it's a while ago now, but it defined the way that growing up, I couldn't not make her rest. You know, I felt like I cannot have her worried. Even as a grown up, it's like I had to take on that role of bringing joy, of
Mm,
bringing comfort, of making sure that my mother is actually at rest. Even the bigger family. There was a time where I told myself, "Yo, it's too much. This name. I want to rest myself. Maybe I should tweak it a bit to make me rest, because I had this thing to make sure that people who are around me are comfortable. They are at rest um, emotionally. I do not enjoy bringing stress or strain on someone. And of course, if you have to always be a peacemaker,
mm,
it costs you something. So
mhm,
I think I've embraced my name at one point, and then I'm like, okay, this is my name. Can't be bringing trouble and bringing peace and bringing rest. So I must choose to just live with it and live with it. So I've just said Pumi, because sometimes I don't want to bring rest in, but I just want to rest myself.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, powerful. It's very, very powerful. Like, in one way, it almost seems restricting and limiting. In another way, it opens up.
Yeah,
our world
and
and
people's.
relationships and connections.
Yeah,
When I think of your body of work, especially around naming, and what it means to a generation, a lost generation. I think we get an element of rest in the restoration of those stories.
yeah,
And I think that that's definitely been the gift of this work that you have done through the various editions of your book and work that continues to go forward. There's been a restoration, and that brings a different kind of rest, which
yeah.
is quite powerful. So your family, your husband is Ugandan, you're South African, you're blending two countries' cultures.
Correct.
Um, and this is the whole thing that sparked the whole journey to
Mm-hmm.
writing about the dictionary. So how does that play into the stories behind your children's names? Because we've got Jabulani Means Rejoice, but does he have a Ugandan name as well? And do those two names make up a story and a sentence? Is that how your family is now carrying on the tradition, as you restore the traditional names, but now create a fusion as you blend these different cultures, which are actually very diverse,
Mm.
as we move forward?
Actually, when like I've said earlier, I did live in Uganda for a while.
Mhm.
Their naming tradition is quite different. I don't know if it was always been that or with the colonial, because most of their naming tradition is religious names. So you will
Mhm.
have someone with either a Muslim name or an English name. Of course, with English, as soon as it's English, irrespective of the meaning, it's like a religious name, even if it means something that is so not religious. So, so that's what I realized, that within the language itself, what carries meaning was clans more than a name that they will give to a child.
Mm.
But also there will be a culture of naming after a relative, which I think it's a European way of doing it. So probably that culture was maybe adopted with the with that colonial period. I don't know what was
Mhm.
their naming tradition before that,
Mhm.
but I know
Mhm.
that it would be like my husband's name, Dennis, is after a footballer who was the father's footballer,
Mhm.
have names like that. And then when he named my child, who is the granddaughter, it was the auntie's name that he gave.
Mhm.
So I think their naming tradition is either religious or that promise of rebirth, where
Mhm.
somebody's born and then they link to somebody who was within the family or who they value, then they pass on that name. My children will have, like my firstborn has got only the South African name, that's her
Mhm.
only name. My second born has got a same name, meaning in terms of English and Zulu name. It's
Mhm. Mhm.
basically the same name. And then my third born has got only the South African name. And then the fourth, we have a late one who made an entry after Jabulani. So after the book, so she's not in the book. She's got two names. She's got an English name as well, not English
Mhm.
name. Her name is Zoe. Sipiwe Zoe, that we have been given the God kind of life. So of
Mhm.
life. So we have a blend with her because her name is
Mhm.
Sipiwe Zoe, meaning
Mhm.
Sipiwe means we've been given, and
Mhm.
Zoe is the God kind of life.
Mhm.
So we have been given the God kind of life. So
That's
that is the only
powerful.
one where we have that sync and the blend. The others is just the South African names, basically.
Well, that's
Yeah.
powerful. That's powerful and interesting that it's the last born. It's kind of like a
Yes,
completing thing that happened there. But also interesting that you've blended the two different cultures in an
mm,
African naming tradition, which is because some names are sentences, and that comes through very clearly
correct.
in your book.
Mm,
And this is actually common in some other parts of Africa where like in Nigeria, for instance, or Ghana, where it is
mm,
a full sentence. A one
correct.
person can have a full sentence. So,
Yes,
like you mentioned earlier, a woman can say her sentence through all of the names of the children.
yes,
Um,
yes,
and that's really, really quite interesting. That
correct.
pattern and the working out of a thing in a family and the coming together of a family.
Mm,
We're going to wrap up the interview soon, but before we do that, I wanted to find out, do you have some favorite names that you discovered in the book? Um, and why would those be your favorite? I mean, other than obviously the ones you've chosen for your children.
yes.
Mm,
No, I, I love good names. You know, I love good
mm,
names. After naming our children, of course, we had family members, even in Uganda, who would ask us to name. We like names like also the book club Tando.
mhm,
So that's one of my favorite. We gave after my one, we gave that name to one of our niece. Why? Because it's a name that we can spread um, throughout the world, and
mhm,
it's a name that is needed.
mhm,
That when she's playing in the playground and they ask her name and her name is different, she has something in that playground to spread. So
mhm,
that one is a beautiful one. Tando, we call it a Tandi. You can have different versions, of course,
mhm,
of that. And then also gift. Our daughter is
mm,
Hiwe, but we gave another child, Sipo, who was a boy. That's also
mhm,
my favorite one because life is a gift.
mhm,
And I've had dealt with issues of infertility
mm,
within my
mm,
close circles, and I know how a woman's heart is when they are looking for a child,
mhm,
the rawness. So when a child comes, there must be an understanding that the child is a gift, irrespective of
mm,
any other details or stories that surround that child. They are a gift. So I love the names that commemorate the gift of
mm,
a child. I enjoy names that have got a history. I enjoy
mm,
because it lets you into something of the past in the present. So I
mhm,
love the names, but some of them you will get to know when you then get to hear the context of the
mhm,
story. But whichever story, if it's got a history, then I love that name because it contains something and it shows that we were able to keep the history and our history, because like they say that the history is always of the victors. It
mhm,
means that whoever gave that name, they felt that they were victors at that moment and they were able to keep the history. They were able to write the history or to tell the history through that name they gave.
mm. Powerful, powerful. I like that. I also like positive names. I like good names. I think your name is a good name. And like I shared my name, my first name is what you would call the promise of rebirth. It's my grandmother's name on my father's side. She died at the beginning of the year 1982, and I was born towards the end of 1982. So there was definitely a commemorative story there, and definitely the events surrounding. the time of my birth. But then my vernacular name in Shona Tanyaradzwa means
Mm,
that we have been comforted, which is almost similar to Phumzile, but we have different stories because
mm,
obviously, there's the comfort in a time
mm,
of loss, comfort that comes when you're yearning for something and longing um, for something in particular. And you then begin to see just the beauty of language and linguistics that, um, as they say, meaning is use, and how it's used gives you a unique story that we should want to keep around and we should want to preserve. So I know that
correct.
you are working towards digitally transforming the book.
Yeah.
What's your goal with that?
Well, one thing I have realized in this journey is that um, keeping history is very expensive in a sense that there is no gain now. It's something that you do for the next generation.
Mm,
So you have to have different role players who are willing and who are able to actually do that. So that's what Jabulani is looking for at the moment. We are looking at a digital platform. I explained earlier to say that we want to have all the storytellers in one platform. We don't want to have something that is no longer living, where we can no longer add a meaning to the name, where people can no longer tell their stories. So the
mhm,
digital platform vision is to have a platform where everyone can go within that name, able to tell their own context, and then whoever else come, even if that name meaning change throughout the course of the history, fine, let it, and we are able to acquire, and so there we're looking for a platform where we can actually have that interactive database.
mhm,
So that is what we're looking for. If there's someone who's interested, we are available. The book, the dictionary, the one that we've already collected is here for us to start, like what you are saying, to have a conversation started, and then we
mm,
can add on that one. So yeah, that is what that's the dream, and we're looking for the players who can come in whichever way, and then
mhm.
we can have it realized.
Mm, definitely. And I love that dream because it's got room for all of us in Africa.
Yes, correct.
And, the modern day Africa, which includes our diasporans as
Yes.
well. And so I think that's really, really amazing and a wonderful way of using technology to accelerate, expand, and democratize that story, which
Yes,
really is almost capturing, I think, the true spirit of Ubuntu and
correct.
our collective strength and togetherness. Phumzile, it's been great having you with us. What I would like you to do before we close off is to read from the introduction to your book. And for those of you who now must get your hands on this book, unfortunately, we don't have an e-version on Amazon yet, but you can order
Yes.
your book through Mojaji Books, African Books Collectives, which has a distribution sort of network that's in most countries in Africa. So if you can look up those two, the first of all, Mojaji Books, which is the publisher, and then second of all, African Books Collective, which is a continental-wide distribution network. So they've got booksellers in different countries and can find a way to get the book to you. And the book that you are looking for is Jabulani Means Rejoice, a dictionary of South African names. And the author is Phumzile Simelane Kalumba. So definitely check that book out if you're interested. If you're about to have a baby, have a look for yourself, or if you're just curious about history and the names, in your own family, take a look. Some of those names, as Phumzile mentioned, need to be spread around because in their diversity, they create a connection point where we can begin to remind ourselves of things around hope, light, gifts, love, blessings, and so much more, including our history. Phumzile, take it away and read to us from your book.
All right. So traditionally, for the newlywed, the birth of a child was a great blessing. Children will be given birth names such as Sandile, which means we have increased, or Busisiwe, means that we are blessed. In a traditional patrilineal societies, inheritance, name, wealth is passed down from father to male children. A female child was married out. She was seen as belonging ultimately to another unknown family, the family of her future marriage, where phrases such as ukuwa kwendlu ukuvuka kwenye, meaning the falling of one house is the flourishing of another. It expressed this patrilineal marriage pattern and explained why they will prefer male children, especially for the firstborn male. And then they will use certain names such as Mfanimpela, meaning, wow, it's truly a boy. And Ntombi Futhi, oh, it's a girl again. To express the joy or disappointment at the child's sex.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think you picked a great section of the introduction to share with us. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And to all of you who have been with us and enjoyed this wonderful conversation, we look forward to seeing you again next week, same time, with another fabulous African female author. Good night, stay warm, and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.